I am Toussaint l'ouverture. You have perhaps heard of me. You are aware, brothers, that I have undertaken vengeance, that I want freedom and equality to reign in Saint-Domingue. I have been working since the beginning to bring it into existence, so as to establish the happiness of us all.
Tellement tranquille, Haïti c'est qu'on s'elle relève, c'est lui qui l'appelle des Antilles. Yo met pas moi la bombe diamant, moi pas de jambes qui te. Fait non yon bel petit pays, qui paye nos bêtes.
The time was late 1700s, and it was a glorious time in Saint-Domingue, now known as Haiti. As the town square in Morlaix Saint-Nicolas announced, no man can sell himself or be sold. His person is not an alienable property. People came out into the street with great joy, and there was great festivity. And the man of the hour, the man who brought liberty and glory to that island, was Toussaint l'ouverture. Regaled with military pomp and splendor, he was greeted with the joyous cries of the people, with their hands out, white and black population of the island. As he was riding through with his white horse, black women and white women shouted compliments at him and swooned over him, watching eagerly for him to throw his handkerchief at them, while men got close so eagerly so that they could touch his hand. As one observer noted, it was a ceremony worthy of a great sovereign. And Toussaint deserved it, for he was a great revolutionary leader who freed his people from slavery and defeated not one, not two, mind you, but 3 European empires in battle, the French, the Spanish, and the British in Haiti. He was also a magnanimous leader that forgave the former slave masters of Haiti and built a society both for whites and blacks on the island. Cheered by his friends as brothers of all colors, lawgiver and father and friend, and respected by his enemies. Truly he was a rare breed of his time and one of history's greatest leaders. For this was the time of the Atlantic slave trade, where black people were treated worse than animals, chained and shackled and carted off to the New World, to be whipped, raped, tortured. But here was a man, here was a people that rose up and stood equal to the white man. Nay, I even say better than the Europeans, and created a society where black and white people could live together, which is an amazing feat to say the least, for the USA didn't free the slaves until 1863, and they didn't get to hold government power and equal rights until late 1960s, and in South Africa until 1990, so almost 200 years after the society Toussaint built in Saint-Domingue. So what happened in Haiti was a great revolution, and here in Rebels, Renegades, and Revolutionaries, we love to bring you great stories of revolutions and the revolutionaries that made them. So let's delve into how Toussaint led the only successful slave rebellion in the Americas. So to analyze the revolutionary that is Toussaint, the real-life Django Unchained, we must first go and analyze his childhood, born into the cruel world of slavery, into the bread at plantation. Sometime in the mid-1700s, Toussaint, like all slaves, experienced a lot of cruelty and saw a lot of cruelty at a young age. That is why some slave parents killed their babies to save them from this cruel fate of being born into the plantation, for they saw no bright future for their children. Toussaint was the son of Hippolyte, a former aristocrat from Benin, of the Aleda kingdom, who was sold into slavery by his enemies. So Hippolyte, he knew a world that wasn't just slavery and servitude, for he knew a world where black men had culture, power, and civilization, and humanity. And I am pretty sure he instilled those memories in his young son. In Saint-Domingue, like all French colonies, its black slaves were ruled under the Black Code. It was another bullshit European empire propaganda of its time to justify and sanitize its cruelty, like civilizing Native American Indians with the slogan, "Kill the Indian, the child, and save the man," or "We must conquer this land to civilize the native and save their souls by teaching them about Christianity." And same was with the Black Code. It was a way to sanitize the evil that was slavery. According to the Black Code, slave masters could exploit and whip their slaves, but they could not rape, torture, or kill them, and they would have to feed and clothe them as well. So this is to present the Parisians and the other French people in Paris and France that slavery wasn't that bad, and that there are rules and regulations that govern them. The reality, though, was much different. For slaves, for punishment, legal authorities heaped upon them ungodly punishment, cutting their hands and ears, breaking all their limbs, and leaving them to die on the wheel, and even burning them alive. All this was done in public to warn other slaves not to rebel. And after executing that black person, the slave owner would get compensated by the state for losing their slaves. Moreover, this only shows the cruelty that was done under the law, for in private, all sorts of barbarity were also committed by the slave masters, whether it was rape, which happened a lot, that even Toussaint's own daughter was raped and gave birth to a mixed child. Other cruelties included castration, pouring hot sugarcane liquid over the slaves, or putting them in a vat of sugarcane liquid and boiling them alive. So it was a harsh life indeed. And life expectancy for most slaves in the plantation was a measly 37 years old. So how did Toussaint manage to survive in this harsh environment and transform from slave to sovereign of a nation? Well, for one thing, he was not a field slave working in the field, cutting down sugar canes and etc. He worked in the stables, since he was good with horses. He was a brave boy that liked to tame wild horses, ride them as fast as he could, and here we see the cultivation of the bravado that would serve him in the revolution. Being a gardien de bêtes in solitude served him well. He did his job well and kept away from the whips and the ire of the slave masters, unlike the field slaves. Another thing that served Toussaint very well from an early age was his intelligence, his guile, which he used to get himself into better position with the slave masters at the Breda plantation. He didn't out and out rebel and use force to beat the system. He first used his intellect to circumvent the system and free himself. For before Toussaint, there have been many other slave rebels in Haiti, the most famous one being of the one-armed voodoo priest called Macandal, who was captured and burnt alive for his rebellion. But at the moment of his public execution, he freed himself from the burning rope that tied him, and still burning alive tried to flee. People witnessing this actually thought he actually had magic powers, and started shouting, "Macandal is free!" So to stop a riot, the authorities shut down the square and told everyone to go home, while they finished burning up Macandal. But since people didn't see the end of the execution, they still believed that Macandal transformed himself into a mosquito and flew away, and that he would one day return and free them, and his rebellion lived on in the psyche of the slaves for decades to come. For that is martyrdom. For you will see time and time again, as you study rebels, renegades, and revolutionaries, for some achieve in death what they couldn't achieve in life. As their violent death, their martyrdom and rebellion inspired many generations to come to take up the fight. But going back to Toussaint, we see another thing that helped him survive, and that is learning how to read from a father figure. And another one is a good slave master, a manager of the estate of Breda plantation, whose name was Bayon. And it was him that gave Toussaint his freedom. For in Saint-Domingue, there were free black folks and mixed colors. For in French and Spanish and Portuguese colonies, there was a caste system, with whites being on top and other mixed races following the second, and then black people on the bottom, and then slaves at the very bottom. And so Toussaint was free. Somewhat wise, because he was no longer a slave, but he still lived in a segregated and very racist society. And what was a free black man supposed to do? Earn money in Saint-Domingue. You guessed it, he owned slaves and tried to start off his own small plantation. Now I know people watching this are like, what? That can't be true. What the fuck? I thought Toussaint was the one that liberated the slaves. A revolutionary, an idealist. How can this be? He's so hypocritical, so vile, that he himself suffered through slavery and he would own slaves himself. Well, to answer those questions, I would teach the people that one, revolutionaries are not about being a saint or the pursuit of sainthood. They come from all backgrounds. Some come from criminal backgrounds, some come from aristocracy. Some did heinous things in their former lives to achieve their goals and etc. 2. People become revolutionaries. They're not born revolutionaries. People change and evolve, and their ideals do that too, and their aspirations as well. If they made wrongs in the past, that doesn't mean they cannot make good in the future. For example, in the Irish War of Independence, many vital informants for Michael Collins were Irishmen that were loyal subjects to the crown. Police officers, people in the intelligence branch, and etc. Many of whom, in spite of their wrongdoings in the past, did a lot for the independence of Ireland. 3. We have to look at the ideal as well as pragmatic side of revolutions. For circumstances make people more than people make circumstances. So this is not to defend that he owned slaves, but pragmatically speaking, Toussaint had to do that to survive. For he had to follow the evil system that was in place at the time. For that is what all, if not most systems do. For they force people to conform to them by many pressures. As Nietzsche wrote, state, quote, the coldest of monsters, holds 1,000 swords and 1,000 appetites over the people's head. And quoting Bob Marley, when you gotta get some food, your brother gotta be an enemy. So Toussaint owned and worked slaves so he could save some money and buy the freedom of his wife and children, which is a crazy situation, but I still don't excuse it. But this is a good example that shows that how much Toussaint loved his family, that he would do anything for them, and they were one of the main motivators for his rebellion. So with things heating up in France, with the French Revolution on the rise, with radical ideas being spread around, Haiti was also heating up, as French visitors openly discussed liberté, égalité, fraternité. So after 2 years of the French Revolution in France, the Haitian Revolution started as well. In 1791, Toussaint and his comrades rose up in the name of the king,